There was a really good piece over the weekend in the Washington Post on Ukraine, what when I was a kid we called the Ukraine. And I don't know where it went, but in any case, this is something you need to pay attention to. Ukraine is a country that's about the size of Texas, with a substantial population. I don't have the statistics in front of me, so I don't want to just go off the top of my head. But it's got more people. I'm sure it has more people than Texas. I mean, it's a country. It's a significant country in Europe. And in fact, there is a possibly apocryphal story that the word Ukraine literally means border. That Ukraine, or point of passage, that Ukraine was the country or the area or the territory. It's gone back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over the centuries. It was the area that was the dividing line or was straddling Eastern Europe and Western Europe. Or, the Eastern Europe being all the way into Russia and then on to the Asian continent, and Western Europe being, well, you know what Western Europe is. And on the eastern half of Ukraine, pretty much everybody speaks Russian, because just to the east of Ukraine is Russia. And it is a breadbasket. It's the east half of Ukraine. Let me draw sort of an analogy. Just imagine that everybody east of the Rocky Mountains spoke French, because it was contiguous with Montreal and Toronto, and what is the French? Quebec is the French-speaking province. Let's just imagine that the influence of Quebec was so great. We have a French-speaking province in North America, that the influence of Quebec was so great that in the breadbasket of America, from North Dakota down to Texas, the middle of the most fertile land, the breadbasket of America, everybody spoke French, and they thought of themselves culturally as being like Quebecois, or whatever the word is. The French-speaking members of people who live in that province in Canada, and that from the Rockies west, where there's lots of timberland and the land is not all that productive and there's not that many big cities, it's more rural. From the Rockies west, everybody spoke English and thought of themselves as Americans. Now, how long is that going to last? The western half of Ukraine speaks Ukrainian. The eastern half of Ukraine speaks Russian. The western half of Ukraine is more ethnically Ukrainian. Historically, the eastern half is more ethnically Russian. And there's this big battle going on right now. Literally, in the streets, BBC does good reporting on this. The U.S. media does crappy reporting on anything international these days, because ever since Reagan did away with the Fairness Doctrine and then Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act, all the major the three big networks in America closed most of their foreign bureaus. But in Kiev and other major cities around Ukraine, they're actually having riots. The president is the guy who remember when there was a president who was, I think Yushchenko is his name. There was a president who was elected in Ukraine, and there was all these allegations of vote fraud. And the Orange Revolution happened. The people stood up, and he got overthrown by the guy who was, kind of pro-Western. Well, that guy is back, and he's the president now. And he's more aligned with Russia. In fact, he only learned to speak Ukrainian in his 50s. He didn't grow up speaking Ukrainian. He grew up speaking Russian. He's more aligned with Russia. And Russia, of course, has a strategic interest and a political interest in Ukraine, and they're a major supplier of fossil fuels to Ukraine. Ukraine supplies food to Russia. And then on the other hand, The Western Ukrainians, they want to align themselves with Europe. They want to be part of the EU. And over the weekend, there was this kind of Davos-like conference. And I'm sorry, I'm forgetting where it was. Was it in Switzerland? It was someplace. Anyway, there was a conference, and Ukraine was at the center of one of the major discussions there. And John Kerry, our Secretary of State, and keep in mind, this is a country that's contiguous with Russia. So this would be like Vladimir Putin commenting on American-Canadian relationships. Kerry basically said, we're here for you, Ukraine. And we are opposed to, essentially, I'm paraphrasing here wildly. The BBC had a great quote. I'm not sure of the source of it, so I can't put it on the radio. John Kerry saying this, but basically saying, we're here, we, the United States, are here for you, Ukraine, and we oppose the meddling of other nations, that would be Russia in code, with Ukraine. So we're taking sides in this thing. And we're taking sides with the side that is out of power right now. And there's riots happening. This is a country that, people are not talking civil war out loud, but I will. This is a country that has the potential, in my opinion, for a civil war. And if that happens, Ukraine is part of NATO, or at least they have a mutual defense treaty with NATO. They also have treaties with Russia. There's the very real possibility that you could see a conflict happening where Russia's coming into conflict with NATO. If Russia comes into conflict with NATO, then we come into conflict with Russia. If we come into conflict with Russia, China comes into conflict with us. And you see where I'm going with this. I've been describing for about 2 years now on this radio program, and I describe in my book, The Crash of 2016, without a lot of depth, because I didn't want to turn it into a real fear-mongering book, that 2014 is not looking that a whole lot different from 1914. That we've got this kind of tinderbox world. And one major clash, in the case of 1914, it was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo, but it really was the beginning of this kind of, clash of cultures between the Serbs and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and thus the Russians and the Germans. And, it ended up in World War I. Everybody had a treaty with somebody else, and so it got dragged into the fight. That we're there now, and we've talked in the past on this program about is the country where that happens going to be Syria? Is the country where that happens going to be Iran? Or is the country where that happens going to be Japan and China with the disputed islands? And I see now a third possibility. Not the Middle East, not Southeast Asia, but Eastern Europe. And if all three of those were to go down at the same time, it would be mind-boggling. So this is a time for us all to literally get down and kiss the ground and thank the gods that John McCain is not our president, and watch carefully.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Pay attention to Ukraine. Pay attention to what's going on in the Middle East, and pay attention to this growing conflict between Japan and China.